everybody. Gail asked me this evening to speak on who in Europe needs us to stand as an ally and use what privilege we have to help them. At first, when I was thinking about this theme, I started to think in my head about oppressed or marginalized people in the European context who might need our help. But I started to think that these groups of people who came to mind so easily to me were people that I had identified over time due to my social locations and as well as my cultural context. A very famous scholar from the intercultural studies world just happens to be a good friend of mine. He too is originally from the United States and is married to an Italian and has made his career at the University of Milan Bicocca. Dr. Milton Bennett is his name. At a recent guest lecture to my students, he started to talk about the shift in study abroad, or the goal of global citizenship, over time from the goal of being about cosmopolitanism to contextual consciousness. I know none of you are study abroad students, well, maybe except for Ema, but her social location is quite different than my study abroad students who are undergraduate American students coming to study a semester in Italy. So what does this contextual consciousness mean? To break it down easily, it is all about understanding ourselves and our fellow human beings as complex beings. This is competence and consciousness of identity, power, equity, and inclusion as part of a mutual adaptation to otherness. So a lack of complexity equals a lack of humanity. That's an easy way to think about it. When we see people as simple beings, we risk animalizing or dehumanizing them, that person or even a group of people. And this in our European context has translated in the past as forms of violence and genocide. The key to not falling into the same failures of violence from the past is recognizing these complexities that each human being carries along with them, something that makes up their unique and diverse identity. In seminary, intersectional theology was very important to understanding this type of complexity that every human being carries with them in life. So what is intersectionality? If you'd like to learn more, this is a great text, Intersectional Theology, an Introduction Guide by Kim and Shaw. So Kim and Shaw, they say that intersectionality is a tool for analysis that takes this into account the simultaneously experienced multiple social locations, identities, and institutions that shape individual and collective experience within hierarchically structured systems of power and privilege. That's a lot of words. So in other words, intersectionality is a lens of understanding how gender, race, social class, sexual identity, and other forms of difference work concurrently to shape people and social institutions within multiple relationships of power. So it's like a kaleidoscope with shifting colors and patterns that are shifting to divulge power. So intersectionality is a praxis, an ongoing loop of action, reflection, action, reflection, action, you get it, that integrates social justice-oriented theory with activism towards social justice. So that theory informs practice, and that practice informs theory. In a way, it's like further truth and light, or revelation as we act. We reflect on acting for others, which inspires us to act again, which inspires us to reflect again, etc., etc. How can we understand intersectionality better? It is a problem-solving approach. And what does it do? Collins and Big, both intersectional theologians, remind us that intersectionality's focus on people's real lives opens space for diverse perspectives. Again, every human being is a child of God and is a complex being or child of God. And if you think about it, intersectionality allows us to uncover the insidious matrix of power while identifying the complex identity and location of each person. Being able to do this will help us to be a better ally and to take action for those who are marginalized or oppressed. We can start doing that by looking at our own social locations. Mike most likely had you identifying privilege points in yourself earlier on. These are places where you hold power or in certain contexts. But intersectionality would have you also look deeper into your social locations to see where you might not hold power. For example, I'm a white male of European heritage. In both my context of being a US American and being an Italian citizen, this is a point of privilege and thus power. However, in my Italian context, I am also an immigrant, which is a point of marginalization. But to just point out how complex all of this is, I hold privilege and power on the scale of marginalized immigration. I'm educated. I chose to come to my new country without being forced. And I came from a country originally seen as privileged. Does this mean that I do not experience the immigrant experience in Italy? One of being marginalized, not fully accepted, looked over, and sometimes lonely? No, I do and have experienced this. Are my experiences different than those, let's say, than migrants fleeing war and climate change crossing the Mediterranean in overloaded boats? Yes, I do not fully experience or understand that experience, but I can empathize with them with the little I know of the marginalized immigrant experience that I have experienced in my new country. I know of the marginalized immigrant experience. I'm sorry, I hold privilege and power as an English speaker and as an Italian speaker in my national context. Yet I am oppressed and marginalized as a gay male. Italian power does not see me as an equal citizen, not allowing me to have children, and thinking that my relation is not sacred enough to call marriage. Intersectionality allows me to be empathetic with those who do not hold the same privileges that I do, and allows me to jump into action to fix the system where I do feel marginalized or spaces where my privilege could be shared with those who need it. So take the privilege points that you already know from Mike's presentation now and look deeper in your social location and find points where you might experience or have experienced marginalization or oppression. Think about that. Write one of them down. Jesus is a perfect example of taking the center of power and moving it to the margins, and taking those on the margins and moving them toward the center. Here it is again, the great reversal, many of the first ending up last, and the last first, from Matthew 20:16. And blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Blessed are those who mourn, for they will be comforted. Blessed are they who are persecuted because of righteousness, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven, from Matthew 5. So, who are these people in our European context? I think each of us has to figure this one out on our own to not simplify what being European means. Being Europeans means that we hold together certain common values and traditions. But again, being European is complex. Boiling this down to a simple list of categories risks missing the nuances of complexity that we deal with in our countries, communities, and cultures. However, a common European trauma that we carry is World War II. This has often been a place for us to reflect and take action as European people about what happens when we dehumanize people, unseeing their complexities and making it easier to eliminate them. Antonio and I are currently watching a miniseries on TV called The Tattooist of Auschwitz. I think about the groups of people who have been sent to this death camp: Jewish people, Jehovah's Witnesses, semi-nomadic peoples of Europe like the Rom and Sinti peoples, and homosexuals. And we see the privilege for the oppressed showing up within the camp's system and structures. The elderly, the disabled, women and children are eradicated immediately. And we have intersectionality here if we think about it. These could be Jewish women or gay elderly people, Christian disabled, or Rom children, for example. Those who are strong enough to work will work until they die. having the privilege of a longer life, hope that the camp will be liberated so they might survive. And then some have jobs within the camps, even if they are Jews or homosexuals, women, etc., that are seen as necessary by the Nazis. They are treated with privilege within the camp and are mostly protected from death. Yet they participate in the unjust system to survive. They must witness the violence and brutality. They must sometimes choose who lives and dies. These intersectional spaces are complex within a highly unjust system where privilege means you live at least one day longer and marginalization means certain death. This past week, I was reminded of the Rom and Sinti uprising in Auschwitz in May 1944, when they blocked the entrance to the SS soldiers to their barracks where they were staying. The Nazis were so taken by the revolt, they backed off. On that day, no Rom or Sinti people, including women or children, were sent to the gas chambers. Many of these same groups of people who were oppressed in the 1940s are still oppressed people today in Europe. But as we humans like to find new people to hate and oppress, I would ask, who are some of the new groups of people who are oppressed in Europe and need our allyship? I think we must dive into the locations where we live to answer this question. I can only really speak to my Europeanness from my own social location. That means understanding my locations of privilege, my locations of marginalization, and my own national and cultural context to help me identify the groups of oppressed people in my European context. I hope that makes sense. For example, just this week in Italian news, there are many ideas of modern day marginalized people who need my allyship in Italy and in Europe. Sofia Stefani, 33 years old, was yet another woman killed by a jealous lover. Femicide is a terrible plague in Italy, where women are killed by their intimate partners. This comes from a long patriarchal history here in Italy. In Europe, for example, 29% of women murdered are killed by their intimate partners, while 43% of women killed in Italy are murdered by their intimate partners. 120 women in Italy were killed in 2023 by their intimate partners. How can I reflect and take action for Sophia and women like Sophia? On May 19th, 23 migrants on a crowded boat from Tunisia headed towards the Italian shores were lost at sea in the Mediterranean. How can I reflect and act to help make sure that migrants fleeing violence do not die violently in the Mediterranean? There is continued war on our continent. Ukraine is in the news daily, being oppressed by Russia. People flee, people die. Infrastructure is consistently dismantled. How can I reflect and take action to help Ukrainians, and other people at war like Ukraine to have the peace that God prefers for them? And on May 18th, Italy did not sign the EU LGBTQIA plus rights bill on the International Day of Homophobia and Transphobia. The current anti-LGBTQIA plus government is the only one in Western Europe that did not sign the bill, a bill that would have helped to protect queer people from violence. Another 8 EU European countries in Eastern Europe also did not sign this bill. We live in an affirming LGBTQIA plus European church, but not all of our nations and communities are safe places for queer people. How can I reflect and act to make sure that queer Europeans are safe and have equal rights? I think my analysis of recent news in Italy will intersect with the same problems of privilege, power, marginalization, and oppression in your European context. I encourage you to think about your European context and identify additional people who require your allyship and action. May we be a people of Zion, a people of the temple, a people who will uphold the worth of all persons, one who dreams and yearns for the peaceable kingdom for all of God's children. Is it any wonder that the temple was built in the center place? Remember who Jesus puts in the center place, and the temple represents those people, those who need us. Let us reflect and imagine them at our table, and then let's go out and find them and invite them to that table. Amen.